The candle had burned to nothing by the time I understood what I had done to myself. I remember the exact moment. Not the night she arrived, though that is where everything began, but the later night, the one 3 weeks into her stay, when I stood outside the healing room in the east corridor of Varenhold Hold and listened to her speak to a wolf that had not let anyone near him in 4 years. Not a word she said to him was meant for me. I was not supposed to be there. But I stood in that cold stone corridor with my hand pressed flat against the wall, and I listened, and the silence had a shape, and the shape was her. That is when I understood, and understanding it did not help me at all. Let me tell you how she came to Varenhold. We had a wolf down Aldrich, one of my border runners, a gray streak of a creature who had been with my father before me and who trusted no one on earth except me and, in his better moods, my steward Bren. He had taken a fall on the ridge road above Dunmere, a bad one, and the Hold's healer was 3 days north at a whelping camp and not reachable by nightfall. Bren went to the village himself. He came back with Senna. I did not know her name yet when she walked through my gate. I only knew what I saw, a woman with a healer's pack over one shoulder and river-gray eyes that moved around my great courtyard with the calm attention of someone making an accurate inventory. She was not afraid of the Hold. She was not dazzled by it either, which was the thing I noticed first, because most people who came through those gates were one or the other. She was simply present, quiet and steady and entirely her own. She was the daughter of Dunmere's village physician, Bren told me afterward. Her father had been the finest healer in the lower country for 30 years. She had trained under him since she was old enough to carry a kit, and she had been running the practice herself for the past 2 years since his hands had begun to fail him. The village knew her. The wolves who passed through the lower road knew her. That was the whole of it. She went straight to Aldrich without looking at me for permission. I respected that. I followed her in and stayed near the wall, out of her way, and watched her kneel beside a wolf who had bitten through the glove of my last healer on a good day, and I watched him put his great gray head on her knee within 4 minutes of her settling beside him. She spoke to him the whole time she worked. Low, steady, the way you speak to the river when you are asking it to run in its banks. I could not always make out the words. I did not need to. Whatever she was saying was working. She reset the bone, dressed the wound, and told Bren exactly what to watch for in the following days in a tone that expected her instructions to be followed. They were. I made certain of it. She was supposed to leave the next morning. She did not leave the next morning because by dawn Aldrich had developed a fever and I sent for her again. She came. She stayed through the fever. When it broke on the 3rd day, she repacked her kit, and I told her, because by then I had thought about it, and I am a man who does not spend words carelessly, that I would pay her 2 months' wages for a month's stay, if she was willing, because winter was coming fast, and I did not want to be without a skilled hand in the Hold until my regular healer returned from the north. She looked at me for a moment, the way she had looked at my courtyard on that first night, steady, accurate, not impressed, and not afraid, and she said, "I will send word to my father and be back by noon." And that was how it began. The council heard she was in residence on the 4th day. They did not come to me immediately. That was not their way. Lord Davin, who had led the council since before I took the crown, was a patient man in the way of men who have learned that timing is the sharpest blade. He let a week pass. He let me settle into the routine of it, Senna in the east wing each morning, her kit spread on the long table, the wolves finding her before the stable boys did, the Hold quieter and somehow warmer in a way I could not account for. He let me get used to it. Then he came. "She is an untitled healer's daughter from a river village," Davin said. He said it gently, the way a man sets down a stone that is heavier than it looks. "The Hold's people are already talking." "Let them talk," I said. "Caelrin," he paused. He only used my name without my title when he thought I needed to hear something I was not going to like. "You know the law. A king's attention, real attention, the kind the wolves can feel, cannot rest on an untitled woman without consequence. Not in this court, not in this climate." I said nothing for a moment. I was looking out the window at the ridge. There was snow on it already, just the first dusting, the kind that would be gone by afternoon. "There is nothing to address," I said finally. He nodded slowly, in the manner of a man who has decided to let you find the edge of the cliff yourself, because telling you about it has not worked. "Of course," he said. "Forgive me." He left. I went back to the ledger I had been working through. I sat there for a full hour and did not read a single line of it. Here is what I have not told you yet. My wolf had known from the first night. I had not let myself hear it clearly, the way you do not let yourself hear a sound in the dark if you have reason to hope it is nothing. But he had known. The moment she walked through the gate of Varenhold Hold with that pack on her shoulder and those quiet eyes taking their inventory, something in my chest had stopped making the particular low sound it had made for 11 years. The sound of a man who has lost a mate and learned to carry the weight of it, and gone very, very still. Not the frantic stillness of a thing on alert, the deep stillness of a thing that has come home. I had been widowed 11 years. Myra had been my first and only Luna, dead of a fever that swept the river valley the second winter of our marriage, and the bond that broke that night had left a quiet, permanent injury in me that I had long since stopped expecting to heal. My counsel had brought me women, daughters of lords, titled daughters of northern packs, women of rank and worth and grace, all of them. I had met them with every respect they were owed and nothing further, not because I was cruel. Because my wolf had simply never moved. He moved now. I told him, as clearly as a man can tell the old animal that lives in the blood, that we were not doing this. That she was a healer in the hold for a month, that she was here for Aldrich, that she was not mine to reach for. He did not argue with me the way a young wolf argues loudly with his whole chest. He simply stayed still. That same deep, settled, home-found stillness, as though he had already decided and was simply waiting for the rest of me to catch up. I did not let him catch up. I had practice at it. The month passed, 3 weeks of it at least, before the night in the corridor. I will tell you what I noticed in those 3 weeks, because you cannot understand what came after without understanding what those weeks were. She was not soft in the way people sometimes mean when they say a woman is gentle. She was not easy to redirect, and she had opinions that she expressed in the direct, efficient way of someone who has spent 20 years keeping living things alive and cannot afford to soften bad news for the sake of comfort. She told my steward Bren that his left knee was in worse shape than he was admitting, and that he would be using a cane by spring if he didn't rest it, and she told him this in front of 3 of my household captains without flinching. Bren, who was ex-cavalry and considered walking without pain to be a matter of personal honor, glowered at her for an entire day, and then began quietly sitting more at meals. She told me, when I asked her opinion on a course of treatment my regular healer had been using on an old pack injury in my shoulder, that the approach was addressing the surface and not the root of it, and that she could fix the root if I gave her 2 sessions and tolerated some honest discomfort. She said this with the same directness she had applied to Bren. I was the alpha king of Varenhold, and she was a healer's daughter from a river village, and she spoke to me like a woman who understood that my rank had no authority over biology. I gave her the 2 sessions. She fixed it. It was the first time the shoulder had not ached in 3 years. She worked all day, and then in the evenings, she sat with the wolves who gathered at the hold's east door where she had spread a strip of oilskin on the stone threshold, because she said the cold came up through the flags and old joints felt it first. They came to her, the hold's wolves, one at a time and then in small groups. Not because she called them, because she was there and they chose it, which is not the same thing, and any man who has lived with wolves his whole life knows the difference. Aldrich, who had bitten through the glove of my last healer on a good day, lay across her feet every evening like a dog that had given up the pretense of being a wolf. He was not the only one. I watched this from the corridor above the east door 3 evenings in a row before I accepted what I was doing. I was not inspecting the hold. I was not checking on the wolves. I was standing in a cold corridor in the dark because she was below me and I did not want to be anywhere else. And then came the night I told you about at the beginning. The night Bren found me in the east corridor near the healing room, long past the hall's fire. I had not realized how late it was. I had not realized I had been standing there for an hour and a half, listening to her voice through the closed door. Bren said nothing. He was too good a man to say it aloud. He simply looked at me, and I looked at him, and the understanding that passed between us had no room for comfortable interpretation. "My lord," he said. "I know," I said. He nodded and left, and I went to my own chambers and sat in the chair by the dark window and looked at the ridge where the first snow had become 4 inches of settled white, and I sat with the knowledge that I was in trouble. Davin came back 2 days later. This time he brought 2 of the council with him. "The talk has moved beyond the hold's walls," he said. "It has reached the river lords." I said, "She is a healer in temporary residence. There is nothing for the river lords to concern themselves with." "Caelrin," he stopped, looked at his hands, looked up. A third of this council sat in the hall the evening before last. They saw where you stood for an hour in the corridor above the east door. I was silent. They are not cruel men, Davin said. They are not trying to harm her. They are telling me that if the Alpha King of Varenhold, who has been without a Luna for 11 years, who is the most watched man in the northern country, is standing in corridors in the dark to be near a healer's daughter from Dunmere, then the question will be raised in open council within the fortnight. And when it is raised in open council, it will not be handled gently. Because the law requires that the question be handled according to precedent, and the precedent is not kind to untitled women. The precedent, I said carefully, is 140 years old. The law is the law, he said, and his voice was heavy with something that I recognized eventually as genuine regret. And the question, once raised formally, must be answered formally. You cannot answer it as you wish to answer it without tearing this council in three, and you know what that costs the pack in a winter like this one. I had known for 3 days. I had been sitting with the knowledge like a man holding something burning, hoping to find a way to set it down without the thing catching everything around him on fire. There wasn't a way. She had been in my hold for 3 weeks. She had not asked me for anything. She had not angled for position or title or my attention. She had come to heal a wolf, and she had done it, and she had stayed because I asked her to. And in those 3 weeks she had fixed Bren's denial about his knee, and my shoulder, and God help me she had fixed whatever the thing was in my chest that had made the low grief sound for 11 years. She had fixed it without meaning to, without knowing, just by being herself, just by sitting on the cold threshold in the evening with the wolves choosing her. And the price of what she had done for me, simply by existing in proximity to me, was going to be paid by her. Not if I could prevent it. I told Bren that evening. He listened without interrupting, which was not his natural inclination. When I was done, he was quiet for a long moment. "You're sure," he said at last, "it was not a question?" He was not asking me to reconsider. He was asking me to confirm that I had looked at the thing clearly and not in a way distorted by my own shame about it. "I am sure," I said. He nodded. "Then tell me what you need." "I need it done before the council raises it formally," I said. "If I move first, it is my doing and I control the shape of it. If the council moves first, the shape is theirs and the shape will be worse for her." "The shape," he said slowly. "You mean you'll withdraw formally before it becomes a formal challenge?" "Yes." "And you'll tell her yourself?" "Yes." He looked at the window for a moment. "You know what your wolf is going to do." "I know. And you can hold him. I have held him through worse." This was not exactly true. But I said it anyway, because it needed to be said, and because I was going to have to believe it in order to do what had to be done. I told her the next morning. I asked for a private word after her morning round, and she came to the small chamber off the great hall that I used for conversations. I did not want the hall to hear, and she sat across from me at the narrow table with her hands folded on the surface in front of her, and I told her. I did not tell her about my wolf. I did not tell her about the corridor, or the 3 evenings above the east door, or the particular silence that had the shape of her. I told her what was accurate and necessary, that my counsel had brought me a concern, that my continued attention, as they had framed it, to a woman of her station would require a formal inquiry into her suitability for a role she had not sought and had not asked for, and that I would not expose her to that inquiry. That I was withdrawing any informal connection that my behavior might have implied before it could be turned into a formal question she would be required to answer. She looked at me through all of it without moving. When I finished, she said, "The council's concern." "Yes. Not yours." I met her eyes, those river-gray eyes that did not look for permission and were not afraid of the dark. "The council's concern is the mechanism," I said, as carefully as I knew how. "The choice is mine." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Is this?" and stopped. I waited. "Is this what you want?" she asked. She said it the way she had told Bren about his knee, directly, not cruelly, just needing the accurate answer. I said, "It is what I am choosing." She understood the distinction. I watched her understand it, a small, precise thing that moved through her face and settled. She nodded once. She said, "I'll be packed by nightfall." "There is no urgency," I said. You may stay through the week, finish with Aldrich. I'll be packed by nightfall, she said again, not angry, not wounded in any way I could see, just accurate the way she always was. She stood and she left, and I sat in that small chamber alone for a long time after the door closed, and I let my wolf do what he did, which was not something I would describe here because it is not something I have the words for. The old animal grief I had been carrying for 11 years was a settled ache by then, a thing I knew the edges of. This was different. This was fresh, and it did not have settled edges, and I sat with it because there was nothing else to do. She was packed by nightfall. Bren came to my study at dusk and told me quietly that she had said her farewells to the household staff and to the wolves, and that Aldrich had followed her to the gate and refused to come back in, and that she had spent 10 minutes with him there, her hands on his great gray head, speaking to him in the low, river-quiet voice until he finally let her go. She had left a full set of written notes on every patient in the hold, every wolf, every human, organized by severity and need and updated to the day. She had left them on the long table in the healing room with the kit she had borrowed from the hold stores already repacked and restocked. She had left nothing that was hers except a small clay jar of a medicinal salve she used on old joint injuries. She had put it beside Bren's door with a note that said, in handwriting I would learn later was as direct as her speech left me, morning and night, I have left enough for the winter. He told me this in a voice that was completely neutral. Bren had served my father and he had served me, and he was the best soldier I have ever known and the most loyal man, and he told me about the salve in a voice completely without judgment, and then he stood there waiting for me to say something, and I did not say anything, and eventually he said, "Good night, my lord," and left. I did not sleep much that night or the following one. On the third day, a little after the noon bell, Aldrich began to howl. Not the pack-alert sound, not the territorial sound. The one that carries for miles across stone and pine and does not have a practical purpose. The old sound. I heard it from the study, and by the time I was in the corridor below it had been joined by 2 more voices, and by the time I reached the great hall's entrance it was the whole of them, every wolf in and around Varenhold hold, all at once, in a sound I had not heard since the night Myra died. I did not understand it for the space of 3 full heartbeats. Then the gatekeeper was at my shoulder saying, "My lord," in an odd voice, and I turned, and through the open gate of Varenhold hold, coming up the main approach alone, without escort, without her healer's pack, was Senna. She had walked from Dunmere. That was 4 miles uphill in 6 inches of snow, in the boots she had worn in the hold for 3 weeks because she had not brought winter ones, and the village shoes were not made for ridge roads. I learned this later. At the moment I only knew she was walking through my gate with a straight back, and those quiet eyes and the early afternoon light on her face, and every wolf in Varenhold was singing. She did not stop at the gate. She did not look around the courtyard. She walked straight to the great hall's main entrance, and I was there, and she looked at me for a moment, one of those accurate, unhurried looks, and then she said, "I need to speak to your council." "Senna, I need to speak to your council," she said again, not loud, not heated, just certain in the way she was certain about bone breaks and fevers. "Will you take me to them, or shall I find my own way?" I looked at her. I looked at the wolves behind her who had followed her from the gate and were standing in the hall entrance in a loose, quiet gathering, not threatening, not performing. Simply there, choosing to be where she was the way they had always chosen it. "I'll take you," I said. The council was in the west chamber. Davin was there, and the 2 who had come with him 3 days ago, and 4 others. They looked up when I opened the door, and they looked at Senna beside me, and there was a long pause that I let run without filling it. She said, "My name is Senna of Dunmere. I am a healer's daughter. I am untitled. My mother's family was of the river pack of Ashenford before they moved to the village 2 generations ago, which I understand does not change my standing in your accounting." She paused. "I know why I was asked to leave. I know what the concern was. I am not here to argue the law or to ask you to set it aside. I am here to answer the question you are going to raise formally, before you raise it." Davin, who had been watching her with the precise, measuring attention he gave to everything, said, "And what question is that, child?" She said, "Whether I am the Alpha King's fated mate." The room was very quiet. She held out her left wrist. The mate mark had not been there when she left. It had not been there 2 hours ago, by my own reckoning. I would learn later that it had come in on the walk up the ridge road, quiet and warm and certain, in the way the bond comes when it has finally run out of patience with being held back. It was there now, a silver-gray mark on the inside of her wrist, the shape that is specific to Varenhold's bloodline that has been recorded in the pack's histories for 200 years, that has only ever appeared on the wrist of the Alpha King's true Luna. The room did not move. I looked at my own wrist. The mark was there, had been there for some time, I realized, an hour, perhaps more, burning quietly under my sleeve while I stood at the gate watching her come up the approach. I had felt it and not allowed myself to register it for what it was. The old habit, the practiced one, the one I had used for 11 years to keep from hoping. Senna was still looking at the council. She said, "The question that needs to be answered formally is not whether I am suitable for a role I have not asked for. The question that needs to be answered formally is whether the Alpha King of Varenhold is going to be permitted to keep his fated mate." She paused. "I am asking the council to answer that question, today, in this room." Davin looked at my wrist. He looked at hers. He looked at her face, and I watched him look, and I watched him find there what he usually found in front of him, a political calculation, a strategy, a thing being managed. He did not find any of those things. He found a healer's daughter from a river village who had walked 4 miles through snow, alone, to stand in his council chamber and tell the truth without decoration. He stood up. I do not know what I expected him to do. I had stopped expecting things by that point. I was standing in my own council chamber with a mate mark burning on my wrist and my fated Luna beside me, and I was not making plans. I was simply there. Davin stood up and he looked at Senna and he said, in the voice he used when he had reached the end of his calculations and arrived at a thing he believed, "The law addresses suitability of rank when no bond exists. When the bond exists," he paused. He looked at the mark on her wrist with the expression of a man who has studied pack law for 40 years and is confronted with the one thing that supersedes it. "When the bond exists," he said again, "the law is not the instrument that speaks." He bowed, not a small bow, not a courtesy bow. The bow of a lord to his Alpha's Luna, with his full height and his full years behind it. The room followed him. I will tell you what I did in the space after, because it is the part no one saw. When the council had cleared the room, and they gave us the room efficiently without being asked, Davin last, and his hand on my shoulder for a brief moment as he passed, I looked at Senna. She was looking at the marks on our wrists with the expression she had worn when she assessed Aldrich on the first night, when she was determining the precise nature of the injury and what it would take to address it. Accurate, unhurried, present. "You walked from Dunmere," I said. "Yes. In those boots." She looked down at her boots, which were wet through. "I forgot winter ones when I packed," she said. "It was not planned. The walk, none of it was planned." She looked up. "I went home. I meant to stay there. I lasted 2 days and a night before the mark started, and my father sat me down and said, in the way of a man who has been a healer for 30 years and has no patience for willful blindness in his patients, that the physical evidence suggested I had already made my decision and I should go make it in person." She paused. "He said you would probably have made yourself miserable about it for the entire winter if I left it to you." I considered this. "He is accurate," I said. "He usually is." I looked at her, this woman who had set Bren's denial straight and fixed my shoulder and covered my wolves in the cold evenings and walked 4 miles through snow without planning it. And I said the thing I had been not saying for 3 weeks, because there was no longer any reason not to. "I should have found a different solution," I said. "I chose the one that protected you from the council's process. I did not ask you if it was the protection you wanted." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You were not wrong about what the process would have been like." "No, you were wrong about whether I would have preferred to go through it." I looked at her. "I would have preferred to go through it," she said, "with you. I would have preferred that to leaving." I said, "I know that now." "Good," she said, in exactly the tone she had used when she told me the shoulder treatment was addressing the wrong thing. Direct, clean, not cruel, just the accurate answer. I put my hand over hers, over the mark on her wrist that matched the one on mine. She did not pull back. She turned her hand over and held mine in the manner of a woman who has decided a thing and does not plan to revisit the decision. And that was how we stood, in a cleared council chamber in a pale stone hold above a river mist village, with the wolves singing outside, and the first real snow of the season coming down past the windows. The formal ceremony was held 3 weeks later, in the great hall of Varenhold, with every lord of the northern country in attendance. I will tell you a few things about it, and then I will tell you the one thing that mattered. Lord Davin read the mate bond declaration himself, which was his right as head of the council, and which, I think, was also his way of making clear where he stood. He had been the first to bow in the West Chamber, and he was the first to bow again in the hall, and he did it with the full weight of his 40 years in pack law behind it, in a way that did not allow the room any interpretation except the correct one. Senna wore a dress that was not, I think, what the court had expected. It was the gray of river water, and it was hers, not borrowed from the Hold's stores, and she had added nothing to it because she was not a woman who felt the need to be other than herself in a room full of people who expected something else. She stood where she was supposed to stand, and she held her wrist out when the declaration required it, and the mark was plainly visible to the entire hall, and the entire hall was quiet in the way of a room that has run out of arguments. When it was done and she was named Lunar of Varenhold before the assembled lords, the wolves inside the hall and outside in the courtyard, and down the ridge all the way to the road began again. The sound that carries for miles, the old sound. Aldrich, who had been placed near the front of the hall because he was a senior wolf, and also because no one had been able to persuade him to go anywhere else, raised his head and howled first, and then all of them, and the sound went through the stone walls of the hold and out across the valley, and I imagine it reached all the way down to Dunmere, 4 miles away, where a healer with failing hands was likely sitting by his fire and nodding to himself. Now here is the thing that mattered. After the hall had received its fill of the ceremony, and after the lords had taken their wine and their places at the long tables, and after Bren had appeared at my shoulder with the expression of a man who has been holding in something pleased and professional for 3 weeks, I looked for Senna. She had been near me, and then, as the hall filled, not near me, because she was not a woman who attached herself to a position for safety, and she had been speaking with someone near the far end of the hall. I found her standing outside the hall's east door in the dark, in the cold that had been 30 days of winter by then, and was serious and settled. She was not wearing her heavy cloak. She had her arms folded. She was looking up at the ridge, where the snow was deep now and the pines were black against the pale sky, and beside her on the cold stone threshold was Aldrich, flat along the flags with his great head on his paws, and there were 4 others around him, and they were all simply there with her in the dark and the cold. She heard me come out and did not turn. She said, "The hall is very warm." "It is," I agreed. I stood beside her. We looked at the ridge. After a moment she said, "Does the ceremony change anything?" I considered the question. It was a healer's question. What is the actual state of the thing, not what are we calling it? "Nothing that matters has changed," I said. "You have been my Luna since Aldrich put his head on your knee in the healing room." She was quiet, then she said, "He had been grieving." "Yes. Old wolves grieve differently than young ones," she said. "They carry it quietly. You have to wait for them to show you where it is before you can help." I looked at the side of her face, the cold ridge light on it. The particular quality of her attention, which was always on the actual thing, never on the performance of the thing. "I know," I said. She looked at me then, sideways, the way she had looked at Bren about his knee, measuring, accurate kind. "You are better," she said. She was not speaking about my shoulder. "Yes," I said, "I am." She nodded once, the way she nodded when a patient confirmed what she had already suspected, and then she looked back at the ridge, and we stood there in the cold together, with the wolves around us, and the hall's warmth at our backs, and the whole long valley below us under the winter snow, and she had not brought her cloak, and I put mine around her shoulders without asking, because some things do not require asking. She pulled it tighter and stayed where she was. That is the part that mattered. Not the hall, not the lords, not the ceremony. That, the cold threshold, the wolves choosing her as they had always chosen her, and the mark on both our wrists in the dark, and the ridge, and her pulling my cloak tighter around her and staying. I said earlier that the candle had burned to nothing by the time I understood what I had done to myself. I was wrong about that. What I had done to myself was not the understanding I reached that night. What I had done to myself was let a woman with river-gray eyes and steady hands and a habit of setting broken things right walk through my gate, and what she had done, without asking to do it, without knowing she was doing it, was the same. She had set the broken thing right, the one I had carried for 11 years and had stopped believing could be addressed. A healer's daughter, untitled, from a river village 4 miles down the road. The whole of Varenhold had bowed. The last thing I will tell you is this. A year later, Davin retired from the council. He came to me before his last session and said that he wanted to name a thing before he left. He said that in 40 years of pack law and council service, he had argued many things with many alpha kings and had been right about most of them, but that there were 2 decisions he had made in his tenure that he wished he had made differently. One of them he did not name. The other one, he said, was the morning he had come to me and said the words, "The law is the law." He said, "She fixed the shoulder," I heard. "She fixed the shoulder," I said. He nodded. "The kingdom too, I think," he said, "in the ways that matter." He bowed and left. He was right. In all the ways that matter, she had.